To kick off this morning's symposium, we are pleased to have Yang Berhormat Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad as our keynote speaker and Distinguished Professor Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah as our moderator for today's keynote session. Today's keynote address is titled The Future of Malaysia, Policies and Politics. Please welcome Yang Berhormat Tun Dr. Mahathir and Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah.
Okay, given that the time has started, I shall start first by thanking the organizers and everyone who's here to welcome and hear our honorable guest, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad's keynote speech. And I must also thank Professor Dr. Terence Gomez for giving an excellent opening with his acknowledgements and so on, so that I don't have to spend time on that. I'll just give a brief overview of Malaysia's economic development as a preamble to Tun Mahathir's keynote speech. Let's look at the period from independence 1957 to 1980. Extension of laissez-faire trade policies that had begun during colonial times, but laissez-faire in the sense that it's within the British Empire. But exemptions and controls to support import substitution till the late 1960s. An important part that developed was Rukun Negara, to integrate Malaysians socially and culturally. It's an important instrument that I thought should have been pursued so that we would not have the sort of ethnic polarization which we have now, but I hope to address these issues later. NEP, New Economic Policy, and ethnic restructuring to address inter-ethnic poverty incidents and inequality. This was seen as inevitable given the truncated nature of development then and the distinct backwardness of especially rural Malays. And of course, then the Industrial Coordination Act, which actually was an instrument that was used to control corporate ownership. Export processing zones and industrial import substitution industrial zones, the latter having started with the Pioneer Industry Ordinance of 1958 continued. They were important instruments to attract FDI and to generate jobs. Two major oil crises gripped the 1970s. The first one, oil prices rose 4 times. It had a more debilitating effect with higher inflation and so on, simply because we did not have Terengganu oil then. And then the second one, 79 to 80, when oil prices went up 2.5 times. This NEP also focused on intersectoral economic restructuring, which I thought was done dramatically. Which had dramatic results in the context of how rural economy was integrated with market economy and how economic development actually progressed. Food security was strengthened. We had the highest self-sufficiency on rice, about 86% in 1975, when our former Prime Minister Tun Razak was still around. Unemployment and poverty showed a trend fall, but language did not integrate people owing to politics. These are issues maybe Tun Mahathir might address, unlike, say, what we've seen in Korea, Japan, Taiwan, or even Indonesia. From 81 till 1990, the government focused on national economic development, and with Tun Mahathir actually launching the Look East policy. A massive infrastructure development took place, and for which our keynote speaker has been revered all over the world. The North-South Highway, Penang Bridge, and then, of course, much later, the beautiful Putrajaya. Of course, he also launched the creation of national heavy industries. One thing that's often not seen, which actually came with him, is the London Dawn raid when he became Prime Minister, which helped transform oil palm from simply specializing on crude palm oil exports to processed palm oil exports and the development of oleochemical industries. In fact, it's a major revenue earner for the country. Considerable external yen-denominated loans to finance the above. That had some problems too. 3 developments aggravated external debt. In fact, we had the highest share of external debt in GDP in the 80s. Falling commodity prices, prices of commodities started to fall, appreciating debt after the Plaza Accord because of the appreciation in yen and with our loans in yen. Poorly performing heavy industries in the 1980s. Rising unemployment, falling capital investment was reversed by the influx of Northeast Asian capital from the Plaza Accord. simply because their currencies were appreciating and the GSP was withdrawn from Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. Depreciation in the ringgit, of course, the Bank Negara depreciated the ringgit, and the return of investment incentives to attract FDI back from 86. Then from 91 till 2003, with this huge avalanche of capital from abroad, overheating from massive FDI inflows led to rising ringgit, sharp fall in unemployment, increased inflows of foreign labor. We saw these things happening. Government launched the Action Plan for Industrial Technology Development. It was colorfully presented by our keynote speaker in 91 to transform Malaysia into a developed country by 2020. We see the huge emergence of science parks with incubators, the Human Resource Development Council, MDAC, Malaysian Technology Development Corporation, MIMOS's corporatization, MITE, and the Multimedia Super Corridor. They were launched to assist this transformation. Focus on large-scale commercial agriculture expanded, but small-scale intensive farming was largely abandoned, while that, along with an appreciating ringgit, destroyed small-scale intensive farming from massive cheap imports as the ringgit appreciated. Rapid GDP growth and ringgit appreciation could not be sustained, and the contagion from the baht crash severely destabilized the ringgit by 97. We also saw some ethnic polarization, but however, masterful capital control strategy that Prime Minister launched stabilized the ringgit and insulated the national economy from liquidation of firms and predatory takeovers from foreign interests. In fact, this is a salutary achievement that the world recognizes now. Democratization and focus on innovative SMEs took place after 2003. Then you had the global financial crisis, 2008-2009. We promoted domestic consumption to substitute for contracting exports. Rising household debt emerged because we lowered interest rates, made it easier to borrow, and so on, almost like a knee-jerk reaction. Then we suddenly see this 1 MDB explosion. Trend slowing down of GDP growth, but DREAM helped reduce poverty incidence and income inequality. Then the second Tun Mahathir's government shared prosperity vision was launched as the blueprint, and this time extending developed status by 2030. PN replaced PH in 2020. But now what we are gripped with, the COVID-19 pandemic, which none of us expected, unleashed from 2020 with deleterious consequences on GDP growth, infections and deaths, dragging massive attention from the PN government. Now, since I have just that much of time before Tun starts his speech, the title of Tun Mahathir's keynote will be The Future of Malaysia, Policies and Politics. These are points I think we should be looking for and hopefully will address to contrast the Malaysian government's development policies in the 80s until 2003 with the ones since 2003. In doing so, what Tun would have done differently during his first premiership and his 2 years during his second premiership. Given the trend surge in daily COVID-19 cases and deaths, what should the PN government do to check the rise, and how should the economy be managed to ensure that the poor, especially those unemployed, the small and medium firms, and businesses in the informal sector and the employees are supported? What steps should be taken to bring Malaysia to the growth path necessary to achieve developed status sustainably, since the focus of this conference is on sustainable development by 2030? And a lot of these are contained in the shared prosperity vision, which also talks about needs-based policy. Should Malaysia continue as any policies, because it seems to contrast with the core issue around shared prosperity vision. With that, I think we shall welcome Tun Mahathir. I'm sure everyone knows that he's our most recognized, celebrated Prime Minister that we've had. Tun Mahathir, I pass the cue to the organizers to welcome Tun Mahathir.
Thank you. Professor Dato Dr. Rajah Rasiah, Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Asia-Europe Institute, University of Malaya. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be invited to this conference and given the opportunity to share some thoughts on where I think Malaysia is heading and what are the policies that will shape its future. I believe that there's quite a number among us who feel somewhat apprehensive about our future given the conduct of the current government and the shenanigans they have been up to, I too share such sentiments. Nevertheless, it would be irresponsible on my part to sit back and allow the bleakness of the future to overwhelm us and choke this nation out of its existence. I would want to believe that this sentiment is also shared with everyone present at this conference, as well as many more out there. Ladies and gentlemen, reason for the situation we are in right now is political instability. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has devastated and wreaked havoc to us as well as to the rest of the world. But we are at the lowest ebb comparatively because our government is weak, ineffective, and rudderless. These traits are symptomatic of flaws in the leadership, or rather, the lack of it. The feeling of living in helplessness and hopelessness is amplified because we know we should not be in this state, because we know we are capable of getting out of it if the leaders provide leadership. We are quite aware of what we can be. We enjoyed a remarkable run for almost 5 decades after our independence. We faced crises and overcame them, most times becoming even stronger. We became an Asian tiger. We also became the voice of the South, of the third world, while nations model themselves after us. All these are not about being nostalgic or blowing our own trumpet. Rather, it is a stark reminder of how far south the nation had gone, as much as a note that we can regain our footing if we can get our act together. Ladies and gentlemen, Santayana's aphorism, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat their mistakes over and over again. We had made mistakes before, but we have learned nothing. The past acts are guides for leaders to prepare a nation's future. This is especially true for a nation like Malaysia, which is so diverse in all aspects of its existence, be it race, religion, and origin, which then contribute further to the diversity in its food, social interaction, taboo, culture, customs, and whatnot. Then the years of coexistence created hybrids and cross-culture generations, further diversifying our people. Despite pessimistic expressions that Malaysians are divided and fragmented, particularly along racial and religious lines, we ignore the peaceful coexistence, tolerance, unity, and mutual regards enjoyed by the large body of our citizenry. We have seen how we can rally among ourselves to find togetherness in times of trouble, whereby misery loves company as much as in times of joy when we celebrate sporting successes and such. It is not an exaggeration that it is the diversity and differences that had built Malaysia to be a proud and tall nation not too distant in the past. In other words, Malaysia has the material, the people to propel the nation forward for as long as the leadership is able to harness them and lead them to work on the blueprints that have been prepared to chart the nation's direction and future. At the same time, we can avoid past pitfalls, know how to tackle them if they threaten us. It is against this backdrop that Malaysia was built to its present-day modern industrialized nation. Ladies and gentlemen, after independence, Malaysia was an agrarian entity dependent on its natural resources. It is not a natural progression or by chance that we transform into an industrialized nation. It took a lot of planning, strategizing, and at times failures and setbacks before we managed to become one. One of the mainstays of our development strategy is the 5-year Malaysia plans, which have now entered into its 12th edition. During my tenure as the 4th Prime Minister, I was involved in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and partly in the 8th Malaysia plan, as well as in the tail end of the 11th and the formulation of the 12th plan when I became the 7th Prime Minister. These plans provide specific targets, objectives, and strategies, and they have mid-term reviews to check whether we are still on track. These plans ensure we do not stray from the nation's priorities that we had outlined at the beginning of the formulation of the plan, or get distracted because of unforeseen circumstances. They also keep the government on its toes, as part of its success could be measured on the success in meeting the objectives and targets outlined by the Malaysia plans. Ladies and gentlemen, on top of the 5-year plans, as you are fully aware, we had also introduced long-term strategies, specifically the Vision 2020, and during my second round in office, the Shared Prosperity Vision 2030. To be honest, I was quite disappointed, to say the least, that we were unable to achieve all the objectives outlined in Vision 2020, which would have ranked us as a developed nation. Why was it important to achieve the developed nation status? If you look at the objectives, you would realize that we would have a wholesome experience in all aspects of the world. Of course, to get there, economic achievement is important. However, economic slowdowns, downturns, as well as unwise decisions, coupled with dishonest, greedy leaders whose priorities were to self-serve and not the nation, had caused setbacks in efforts to achieve the objectives of Vision 2020. When I returned to office after the 2018 general election, fully aware that the Vision 2020 objectives would not be fully realized, we started working on Shared Prosperity Vision 2030. It is a continuity to the Vision 2020, but at the same time, new strategies and policies would be put in place, reflecting new and added priorities, as well as tweaking some of the strategies and policies which over time proved to be ineffective, redundant, or irrelevant. If Vision 2020 is summed up as efforts for the nation to attain the developed nation status, the Shared Prosperity Vision is aimed at ensuring all Malaysians get to enjoy a decent standard of living by 2030. Special attention is also given on regional economic coexistence, drawing Sabah and Sarawak into the center as the center reaches out to the other states. Ladies and gentlemen, however, the devastation and uncertainties caused by the COVID-19 pandemic threatens to derail Malaysia yet again in pursuing the long-term development that vis-a-vis the shared prosperity vision. In fact, the current mess caused by a clueless administration that is unstable and of questionable legitimacy seems set to seal an unsavory fate for Malaysia. The current state of affairs of the nation, from the unabating numbers of new COVID-19 cases that keeps climbing, the scary number of increasing death toll, as well as the painful experience suffered by patients from lack of attention and medical care, the hospitals that are stretched to its limits and almost breaking their seams, the hopelessness and helplessness leading to suicide, all points towards a failed administration. And the political front is so divided and divisive that it is unable to provide any solution to the crisis. Indeed, it cannot even govern properly. It is from the sense of hopelessness, helplessness, that I decided to propose the setting up of a National Recovery Council, the NRC, a body that is not constrained by party politics, but strictly focused on getting the nation out of this disaster. The NRC is to have members who are technocrats, experts, academics, and economists. The immediate priority is containing the pandemic. Reviving the economy is another focus, and then it is the education sector as well as social development. Political considerations will be kept at a minimal level, and politicians involved would not be representative of political parties. Indeed, the NRC will be focused on the pandemic and pandemic-related issues, but it is not to function in a vacuum or removed from existing policies and national plans. While the NRC prioritizes short-term and immediate contingencies, it will be streamlined along the strategies of the shared prosperity vision and the 12th Malaysia Plan, especially in its economic, education, and social development approaches. The reason why this is important is because as much as the NRC immediate concern is the pandemic and pandemic-related fallouts, it must also not be a factor that derails the long-term policies and strategies that had been put in place pre-pandemic days. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed the worst of times, and there doesn't seem much hope of us getting out of this devastation anytime soon. However, it is also the best of times for us to dig deep into our reserves and stand up to be counted. For every single failure of the leadership, we stood up and be counted, either by ways of contributing to the poor and displaced or voluntarily. On my part, I believe setting up the NRC is an answer to what the government had failed to do, either due to lack of concern or lack of wit. We have gone through many crises in the past. We struggle and get derailed at times, but we kept picking ourselves up and kept plugging on, and our contemporary history would show that we had always emerged the better and stronger. This time around, the leaders had shown its inaptitude to lead and had left us grasping at loose straws. It need not be. All the current leaders need to do is to let others take the responsibility. It would be unwise to entrust those who had repeatedly failed in dealing with the pandemic and the pandemic-related issues when they are the reason for these failures. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahathir. It's a pleasure always listening to you presenting your views. Let me just point a few, take a few points from what you just said. Among the points I thought that were really incisive, relevant for it to hear is Tun addressed the 5-year plans, which were central, but Tun also addressed the long-term plans, apart from his earlier Lucas policies and his 1990s Vision 2020, when he delivered the talk through the way forward, and then of course subsequently his own shared prosperity vision when he came back as prime minister. But of course, and he also made the point that Malaysia has faced several crises before. Indeed, that's true, and Malaysia always came back stronger. And in many of these situations, Tun himself was there, presiding over the country's leadership. Now, I shall not take more time away from it, especially so when he gave it in a very crisp and articulate manner. I shall go to the questions that have been put up from the audience. The first question, Tun, do you think Malaysia can fully recover economically from the COVID-19 pandemic? That's the first question I've got to pass to you.
Well, in the short term, it cannot. We cannot become economically stable and prosperous again in the short term. But over a long period of time, we can take corrective actions, and this will restore our ability to grow and develop.
Okay, the second question here is, again, it's from popular questions that the organizers have called and picked out those questions for me. Hello, Tun. Would you like to know, we would like to know your thoughts on how politics or the government itself should intervene in Malaysia's market. I'm sure there's been lots of intervention before. Maybe the question requires a fresh take on it, Tun.
Well, I would like to say this, that by and large, Malaysian politicians do not understand the politics of democracy, the politics of constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy. What they see is opportunities for making something for themselves. Apparently, in a democracy, just about anybody can aim to become the prime minister. And becoming the prime minister means you not only get certain powers and authorities, but also make a lot of money. It was proven during the period of Dato Sri Najib that during his time, he was able to somehow or other make billions of ringgit. So this has affected the thinking of many Malaysian politicians. They think of involving in politics in order to make money for themselves, not to serve the country, not to serve the people, but to make money for themselves. And because of this, they are prepared to be bought by whoever gives them the best price. And so, after the people had elected a government properly through a general election, the people who won were bought by the people who lost, so as to cross over and join the people who lost the election and form a new government, a backdoor government. And of course, this backdoor government is not dedicated to fulfilling their promise to the electorate. They want to do things to benefit themselves. That is the problem now, because we don't really understand the purpose and the way of the way that democracy works.
Thank you, Tun. I'm not sure the next question is somewhat provocative. The question implies that there's a lot of competition in politics. Isn't it time for the young or the old to give way to the young? Is Malaysia ready for young leaders?
Well, Malaysia is ready. One has to remember that when we became independent a long time ago, most of the leaders were very young. They were under 50. They were young. Even Tun Razak was young. But over time, these people refuse to step down. When they age, they refuse to step down. They insist on continuing. And so the whole government becomes older and older. This leaves the young people no room to participate in the politics of the country. But I think that they can contribute, not completely young, but the young plus the old with their experience will provide us with a better government than just simply because being governed by young people. We have to have a combination of idealism of the young plus the experience of the old.
That's Tun's reply. The tacitness experience of the old and the drive from the young. We have another question here. What do you think are the key elements required to revive the economy and bring back Malaysia to the growth path that you yourself had envisaged before to develop status, but in a sustainable way?
The most important thing is stability, political stability, and the rule of law. Once you have stability and the rule of law, people will know what they are dealing with. They will find a more friendly reception for them. Both local investors as well as foreign, they will know that the government is friendly towards them, and they feel comfortable that they can access the government for all their problems and troubles. And secondly, of course, we have to work according to the law of the country. We cannot do anything beyond the law or ignore the law. This country is ruled by two different sets of laws. One is the Constitution, which provides the basic law. And after that comes the ordinary laws that are passed by Parliament to meet situations in the country. And if we stick to the laws, people will know how they stand, how do they behave in order to be within the law. And that is something that investors like because they know what they are in for. So one is political stability, secondly is the rule of law.
Thank you, Tun. We have another question to go back to your first term as Prime Minister from 1981. I remember quite clearly the initiatives that you took. I mean, for some reason, Malaysia faced a hostile external environment. In fact, I thought those were great policies at that time. Looking east also meant national ownership. The example to Japan, Korea, which you often quoted, and we can add Taiwan to it. But it seems like the shift now is so much so that we are more focused on foreign direct investment. The question itself seems to suggest what we should do to bring back foreign direct investment. But perhaps Tun might also address the other point, because in the end, development, knowing your leadership in the South, is about our own national firms doing well.
Well, we were actually the original country to start welcoming foreign direct investment. Since then, of course, many countries have adopted the same policy. They too attract foreign direct investment. And when we are in competition with them, we find that we are not as attractive as they are because they can provide very cheap skilled labor, which we cannot. Our labor cost has gone up. So it is now time for us to change from dependence upon foreign direct investment to domestic investment. Now, if you look at Japan and Korea and even China, they did not grow because of the foreign direct investment. They grew by starting their own industries to meet the demands of the world market. They adopted the technologies, but then they started their own big companies, which were able to produce products for the world market to compete with the products of the West and eventually to overcome the West. And now, of course, the market is full of Eastern products coming from Japan, Korea, and China. But it is time that Malaysia thinks about that. That now we have come to the stage where we have the capital, we have the know-how, and we have the management skills to set up big companies that will produce products not for the domestic market, but for the world market, to enter the world market and compete with the others. We still have certain advantages. For example, we have some resources that we can use. So the time is ripe for a change in strategy away from dependence on foreign direct investment to domestic large-scale investment for the world market.
Thank you, Tun. The next question, the way forward, which was the basis for achieving Vision 2020, brought in exemplar initiatives to develop parastatals like the Multimedia Super Corridor, the MTDC, corporatizing MIMOS, HRDC, MDAC, and so on and so forth. But to many people, including the incubators, they've all become white elephants now. They are not firing the same way to achieve the goals that you had set. What should be done from now to revive them?
I think very early we saw the role of the new technologies, basically information technology, the ease of communication, which enables us to contact people more easily than before. We don't have to travel to meet people. We can contact them directly. We can sell products without having to display them in the market. So this enables us to enter into a new phase in the management of the economy. We have to understand that the new technologies, including artificial intellection, artificial intellect, and the like, provides us with new kinds of business. We have to learn how to make use. For example, we have machines that can perform the work for us, but the machine will only work if you know how to program the machine. To program the machine, you must know the workings of technology. So now the focus should be on how to make use of the new information technology and the ease of communication in order to be more productive and to access a wider market, the world market.
Yeah, that I think I having visited DreamAge, Aerodyne, and so on, looking at the videos of Tun, how virtual realities and augmented realities go with Industry 4.0. I hope what Tun says could be brought into. There is a question I got through my handphone from one of your able civil servants of the past. He says, should Malaysia pursue policies for Malaysians, or with extra focus on Malays, if you want to achieve the goals that you have set, the noble goals to become developed?
Well, actually, we should be Malaysian, but we insist on identifying ourselves with our own race. In a Malaysian country, there should be a single language, there should be a single culture, and there should be no reference to our racial origins. But the people in Malaysia insist that they be identified by their countries of origin. They are they are not only going to identify with China, but they have to have Chinese education in Chinese, and they have to, their home language is not the national language, but Chinese. And the Indians are the same. For as long as you insist on being identified with your countries of origin, the fact of race will influence our thinking. And we are actually separated by different cultures, different language. And for politicians, it is necessary to cater to this division that is found in Malaysia. in other multiracial countries, they adopt the language of the original people and they become people of that country. For example, Eisenhower is German, but he became an American and he led the Americans against his own country because he is American and not German anymore. But here we have, my country is China or India, so I must be a Malaysian Indian or a Malaysian Chinese. And the Malays, of course, feel that this separates these people from them. They may say that Malays are also migrants, but before people came here, Malay was the language of the country, the culture of the country. It was the system of government was Malay, but we have accepted the migrants as citizens. But in other countries, migrant citizens adopt the national language, the culture of the people. But here, we resist that. We don't want to be completely absorbed by the indigenous people. We want to retain our separate race. And for as long as that is there, then politics also will see division in terms of race.
So now that you gave that as an answer, I always had this passion to ask you this question, my own personal question. Since we've had the Westphalian states from 1648 and the French Revolution, the notion of nation, negara bangsa, became a key thing. And subsequently, I've often fought against this argument that to learn science, you have to go to English, because we see Taiwan, China, Japan, Korea, they are not, science has evolved in their own languages, just like Bahasa Indonesia. Now, why did we pursue this political parties in such a way that Bahasa Melayu? Because I myself studied in Malay first. I was a district champion orating in Malay, and I can say that I was disappointed that we haven't made this language our guiding language of nationhood. Perhaps I want to get Tun's own take on this.
Well, at the time when we were struggling for independence, the Malays wanted independence, but some Chinese were not keen to be associated with the peninsula. They thought that they should be treated like Singapore is treated. So because of that, in order to persuade the Chinese and the Indians to accept Malaysia as their home country, they demand that they retain their language, they retain their culture and everything. If we don't agree to that, they will not support independence. And the British had said that if we don't give citizenship to the Chinese and Indians, we will not get independence. So in order to accommodate the demands of the Chinese and Indians, we say that, yes, okay, we will have a national language, but you can continue with your own language and culture. So as a result, this country, when it became independent, had 3 different groups of people, very big numbers, and they retained their own language and their own culture. The home language of the Chinese and Indians is not Bahasa Malaysia. In Indonesia, I believe they use Bahasa Indonesia. I have heard Chinese families. Once I was walking in Osaka and I heard Malay being spoken behind me, Indonesian Malay. And I thought that these were Indonesian. I turned around. They were Totok Chinese. They were real Chinese. But their language is Bahasa Indonesia. It doesn't happen here. It used to be. At one time, the Baba and Nyonya could only speak Malay. But now, of course, they feel that they need to be identified with Chinese and China. So now they drop the habit of speaking Malay. They speak English, and they have learned Chinese to be identified with the Chinese. So we are not getting together. We are getting further apart. So if we had, like the Baba and Nyonya, decided that the future language of the country, of the people of Malaysia, would be Bahasa Malaysia, then when we became independent, there would be no division. But it is because we had to agree. Only if we agreed can we get independence with the support of the Chinese and the Indian community.
Thank you, Tun. I myself, of course, I'm quite conversant in Bahasa Indonesia. Yes, they have Indonesian names mainly, the Chinese there, and as well as most of them can't really speak Chinese. Coming to the questions for you further, Tun, in this political deadlock, quagmire that the parliament is in, does the king have a say in solving it? The political situation, the political crisis in the country.
Well, when Prime Minister is rebuked by the king, that should be enough for him to step down. But he doesn't want to step down. So the only solution at this moment is an election, general election. But we cannot have a general election because of the COVID thing. So if we cannot do that, what can we do? We cannot go to parliament because parliament has not been able to function. And even in parliament, it is probable that no one would be able to form a government. So it is left to the king to take the initiative. Has the king got the power? We think that during the emergency, the king has the power. We see everything done during the period of emergency is in the name of the king. Everything is the king who has done it. But in fact, even before darurat, before emergency, the king, on being advised to have an emergency, rejected it. In other words, the king, when receiving an advice, is not does not regard the advice as a command. This is different from the British advisor of old. In the old system, the agreement between the British and the Malay states that when the British advisor gives advice, it must be carried out. So it is basically a command. But in the case of our constitution, it merely says that the king acts on the advice of the prime minister. Now, the advice means the prime minister gives his view, but whether the king will follow that view or not is left to the king. That should be the meaning of advice. But what is happening now is that the the government is saying that when the government gives advice to the king, automatically the king must do everything that they tell. Yeah, during my time, I introduced a modification in which if the king does not agree, he can refer it back to parliament. And if the parliament came back with no amendment, then the king can take 2 months to agree. At the end of 2 months, if still the king doesn't agree, the law becomes valid. So that is the situation at the moment. I don't know whether that applies now, but we cannot wait for 2 months for the king to give his view to approve. So in that case, of course, we see that the king has been conferred with numerous powers, and among which is, of course, to solve this impasse that we have come to, where the king has one different stand, and the government has a different stand. So the government's advice is basically rejected by the king. So what happens?
Thank you, Tun. I'll try to collapse two questions into one here. Um, the question says, most economists, national and international, believe that Malaysia is in the middle income trap. It is stuck in such a way that there is no real sign of upgrading to become high high-income country. So in that sort of vein, while Malaysia is successfully industrialized, from what Tun mentioned just now, but it seems to be facing difficulties in reaching frontier technologies as when it comes to our firms. That's mainly the point. What should we do to break out of this middle income trap?
Well, there is a lot that the government can do. But basically now, we do not have a functioning government. We have a clueless government, a government that doesn't know how to handle problems. So in that situation, we had suggested, as I mentioned in my speech, the setting up of an NRC, National Rehabilitation uh, 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 Committee or committees. So that should focus on doing what can be done. But firstly, with regard to the pandemic, there are many things that can be done to confine the pandemic so as not to spread further and further. We can do such certain things. And if you can release the government from being affected by the pandemic, the economy itself will recover. The economy will recover because then we will be able to work and to produce. But today, marketing is different from in the past. In the past, you market, you have to display your goods, you have to talk to the buyer, etc. Today, you can buy anything in the world without even seeing the product. They are advertised in the media. You can identify what you want to buy. You can place an order, and then you can have the thing delivered to you by the supplier. You don't have to go and see. So this is the new way of buying things and the new way of selling things. In fact, it is very good for us because now, instead of having only a limited market in our own village or town or even country, we now have the world as our market. We can sell anything to the world just by advertising on the media, and then we can sell through the media. Our clients can buy through the media, and therefore we have now enlarged our market, and we should do better than before when the market was confined to displaying goods and talking with the buyer and things like that.
Tun, you were expressing serious concerns about the surge in COVID-19 infections and also a surge in COVID-19 deaths. And you mentioned about the alarming proportions to which this is even getting into people committing suicides. Now, it implies that you're addressing, to one extent, focus on stemming this collapse in preventing or in assisting our citizens from being exposed to COVID-19 and, of course, deaths. But there's also the other proportion when an economy is shut down, especially the informal sector workers. They live by the morning, by the road shoulders selling things. They are not allowed to earn the incomes to survive. Now, what is your take on addressing these two axes? The health part of it to help Malaysians protect them from disease and death, and the second one, they have enough to survive.
Well, we have to have the lockdown because the disease is spread through contact, close contact. So we have to avoid close contact, and that means we have to shut down. But when you shut down, the small businessman, for example, can operate from his home, but he may not be able to do the same kind of business. He may be able to do a different kind of business where the marketing is online. He can sell whatever he produces at home online, and he can produce quite a lot at home now using machinery, cheap machinery, which can be bought very easily. Therefore, if you cannot sell your tom yum on the roadside, you can produce something else, some food product in your own home and sell it online. And therefore you have a replacement. Maybe you may not earn as much as when you have your roadside stall, but at least you'll give you an income. Failing that, of course, the government has a duty to finance the people, to give money to the people. Many countries allocate trillions of dollars to help the people during this kind of situation. But also, we need to feed the people. People have no money, no food, and they have to be fed. The government could set up kitchens and supply food to the people who are unable to get food. It has to be done consistent with SOP, and this can actually be done. So we expect that this pandemic will not last forever. There will come a time when it will lessen and maybe we can overcome it. But in the meantime, people are suffering to the extent that some are committing suicide. Yesterday, two people committed suicide yesterday because they couldn't stand the strain. They don't have the money, they don't have the food, their children and their family cannot eat, and this is a tremendous pressure on them. So to reduce that pressure, the government has to supply some money and some food, most importantly food. But the people must be told that these are abnormal situations, that you have to accept a certain abnormality in your way of life. But there is no propaganda, no effort made by the government to explain to the people the situation we face. We cannot have what we had before the pandemic. During the pandemic, things are different. What is normal during the pandemic is not normal during normal times. So people will have to accept that. And if the people will accept that and the government will act in order to support the people, I think we can, we can face the challenges until such time when the pandemic lessens.
Yeah, Tun, speaking from his experience also as a medical doctor, not just wearing the hat of a former prime minister. Of course, Tun hasn't on your own, even though the arguments that the pandemic arose earlier before your second premiership was, you were dislodged from being the second prime minister. But of course, in terms of reality manifestation, after you're gone. Now, we don't have the Spanish flu experience of 1918. Of course, we don't have that in your premierships. But let me contrast the current Prihatin, Penjana, and the various different stimuluses the PN Perikatan National Government has put up now under Dato Sri Mustafa Mohamad. Now, I want to contrast this despite the fact that this pandemic is different in the sense that you can put up stimuluses, but firms can't go and operate. Your 1998 capital controls that you introduced, your government also lowered interest rates, forced banks, certain portfolio to be lent to the SMEs with little collateral, little focus on collateral, which helped revive lots of businesses that were undermined when the crisis first struck. How do you compare that with what the initiatives of the current government to help the small businesses?
During that time, there was a government. I was the prime minister of that government. But because the threat we faced was very special and it is affecting the capabilities of the government, we decided to have a special committee which meets every morning to study the situation and to find solutions to the problems which arose during that time. Every morning we would sit and we would hear about companies suddenly unable to pay debts, about debts increasing in amount because of the exchange rate, and all these things were tackled by this small committee. So this small committee actually acted independently. Independently, it was not an official committee. It was just a committee set up by me, because I find that discussing this thing in the cabinet will not find solution. I have to bring people from outside the cabinet, people with expertise, bankers, business people, and all that were brought in into this committee, and we were able to focus on the problem caused by the devaluation of our currency. And as you know, eventually we came up with a solution, radical, but still we had to be brave enough to do something that is condemned by the whole world. All the economists and the financiers in the world says it cannot be done. But we reasoned that at that time, Chile and China did not allow their currencies to be traded. So we decided that the way out is to prevent the currency from being traded. If the currency is not traded, then the value can be fixed. So that was our solution. So the having a special body like that is very important, because the cabinet cannot. The cabinet is made up of politicians who are constrained by their own party policies and all that. But this special committee, at that time it was headed by me, but I don't think our present Prime Minister is quite capable of doing that. But if we have this NRC that we propose, we bring in people from outside with expertise, not constrained by their party politics. So that is the answer to the problem now. So that was how we overcame both the 1969 problem and also the 1997-98 problem, by having a special body that is out of the cabinet.
Thank you, Tun. Although this question to me may not be precisely correct, because I remember having dinner once with the late Lee Kuan Yew and Professor Wang Gangwu. Lee Kuan Yew actually mentioned that while they allowed these three languages, but he mentioned the national language for communication was English. But let me read this question to you. Looking at Singapore, they have been adopting three languages. Why are we different? Why can't we allow that?
Actually, I once went to Singapore, invited by University of Singapore student. I began my speech in Malay. They were shocked. They were shocked why I spoke in Malay. But I said, but this is your national language. This is Malay is your national language. I'm speaking to you in your national language. And yet they were shocked because they couldn't understand Malay. So although Malay is the national language of Singapore, and to a certain extent, like giving command words and all that, in the army they use Malay, but generally it's not, Malay is literally or practically not their national language. They don't even learn it and use it at home. But on the other hand, initially they had Chinese Nanyang School, for example, where they were using Chinese. But the government of Singapore at that time decided that we should use English, and they abolished the Chinese school. They abolished the Chinese school. So the national language of Singapore actually is English. It's not Malay. And the Chinese language has now become important, not to Lee Kuan Yew, but to his successor, because during Lee Kuan Yew's period, China was a third world country, very poor. In fact, I remember Kuan Yew telling me that he went to China and he told me, there's nothing to be afraid of. They are very backward. China is very backward. Nothing to be afraid of. But What happens later on, of course, after Deng Xiaoping changed the whole ideology to accept capitalist practices as part of socialism, then China has become a very important country in the world. It's going to be probably the most powerful country in the world. And for that, Singapore has decided that now we should learn Chinese. Why? It's because it's very pragmatic. They want to do business with China.
Thank you, Tun. But of course, the late Lee Kuan Yew and the current Lee Hsien Loong speak reasonably good Malay. The next question here is, Salam Tun, how should we empower? How can MACC be empowered to combat corruption in this country?
This is a very difficult thing because you see, MACC is under the government, and the government fiddles with the MACC. We notice, for example, that certain people are investigated, certain people, which everybody knows are corrupt, are not investigated. So we feel that there is some fiddling around by the government in order to save their own people. Actually, I believe that the MACC should investigate the change of government in Sabah. How did 13 people jump out of the government to join the opposition? Well, I think there is reasonable expectation that they were bribed. So a proper investigation would reveal that their lifestyle has changed. When you have a lot of money, you have to spend money. When you spend money, people will see. You can find evidence. But nothing was done. On the other hand, we find that some opposition members or those who are not supportive of the government are being investigated. I believe that the leader of MUDA, Syed Saddiq, is being harassed all the time. At times, he was asked to come for questioning, and then nothing was done. But now he is again being questioned, and he is charged for, I don't know, for misuse of party money and all that, which is, which is not quite true. So the MACC could be a good institution to curb corruption. But I think MACC should only be responsible to Parliament. Should not be responsible to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Tun. This is the last question because we're coming to the end. It is a follow-up question from my handphone. We know from the 1960s, from our first Prime Minister, the late Tunku Abdul Rahman, the issue of Sabah, and the entire range of prime ministers, this issue of crossovers, frogs jumping from one party to another has been around. But how do we really empower MACC to prevent this for good? You raised some very important point. Now I'm adding this to that question. Very important point of how we make this answerable, MACC answerable to the Parliament. But can you say a little more on that?
Well, I think eventually it has to be the culture of the people, because they determine who should be the government. But if the people believe that if they are given some money, they will support, then we are going to have corruption. If the people is against corruption, they must never act because they are given money. They should reject any offer of money during an election and choose the people who are clean. But at this moment, big numbers of people are voting because they were given $200, $300. We saw this in one by-election. where the people were bribed, and of course they voted according to the party which bribed them. So if the people reject corruption, they must reject corruption during election. Choose only the people who do not corrupt you, who do not offer money to you, but who are known to be clean and have no history of being involved in corruption. Then you can have a government that is corruption free. Only a government that is corruption free, which can ensure that corruption is is controlled or abolished. But if you choose a government that is made up of known corrupt people, please expect no reduction in corruption, because the government itself, including the Prime Minister, is corrupt.
Thank you very much, Tun. I'm sorry. I'm sure with Tun, with his incisive mind, has briefed us with his take. It's always, even though I've listened to him many times, each time I listen to him, I learn new things. So thank you very much, Tun. And I wish to also thank those who have come. All good things have to come an end. Thanks again, Tun, very much for this wonderful keynote and your responses after that. I pass the cue back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you.